Hi everyone, welcome to the first conversation in the Hustle Fuel series. I'm Aprajita Bhattacharya. I live in Seattle where I work at Microsoft. Outside of work, I anchor Hustle Fuel, a founding fuel series about role models from the world of technology and entrepreneurship. As part of the series, I plan to uncover the untold stories of new age women leaders who have built meaningful companies and careers. I hope to learn more about their experiences and the hustle fuel that they bring to the table. While these conversations would be particularly relevant for women, I definitely think they're not relevant just for women. The hustle fuel that these women leaders bring to the table is precisely the attitude and inspiration that any founder or professional needs to succeed in today's evolving workplace. I'm personally very passionate about building community around shared experiences. Over the early years of my career, living and working across multiple countries and industries, I've learned that you cannot be what you cannot see. As part of the series, I will invite one woman leader every month, and I hope to have a conversation about a range of things. Everything from how to speak up as an introvert to how to be more confident and inspire more confidence in your teams to how to build an influence roadmap and secure buy-in at your organization or funding as a founder, and much, much more. I'm super excited to get these conversations going. And in the spirit of show not tell, I'm going to introduce our first guest. So, our first guest is someone who thinks we should all know more about ourselves, all the way down to our chromosomes. Her goal is audacious. She wants all Indians to better understand, access, and benefit from the human genome and to fundamentally change healthcare in the process. Something she said to me the first time we spoke really resonated with me and the Hustle Fuel series more broadly. She said, I want a day when we don't have female role models in tech. We simply have role models. And that's precisely why she makes such a great first guest. She is a role model for showing tenacity and grit in building and scaling two very successful health tech companies in India. She embodies what it means to lead with empathy. And with her husband as co founder, she personifies what it means to have an equal partnership at both home and work. I'm very excited to chat with Anu Acharya, the CEO and co founder of MapMyGenome. MapMyGenome is India's largest genomics company. It's growing super fast at a compounded annual growth rate of over 80% over the last 3 years. It's raised significant international funding, and the goal is audacious. As I said earlier, they want to save 1 million lives and touch 100 million Indian lives by 2030. So I'm super excited to chat with Anu. Hi, Anu.
Hi, Apu. It's a pleasure to be here with you on this show.
It's likewise. It's very, very exciting to have you here. So let's jump right in because whenever we chat, we always have plenty to talk about. So starting right at the beginning, so you grew up, your father was a college professor. You grew up in a small college town in Kharagpur. So how does the daughter of a college professor growing up in a small town like Kharagpur develop the risk appetite of an entrepreneur?
I think I certainly grew up in a small town in Kharagpur, but my genes, they came from Marwar. So I guess one was, there is something that is there in the genes. So, being a Marwari, I think that sort of gives you that little bit of an edge. But I think it was more due to the nurture part of the whole equation. So even though my dad was the professor, and his main job was research and teaching and all that, but I think when we looked at him as just the kind of person he was a scientist at the same time, and he was always experimenting with new things. We often got he would experiment with sometimes with husk, and he came out with lots of different materials for our house and a lot of different things. But in the process of that, we also came to some of these things that he would create that would make our mouth burn. So he was trying to make a toothpaste out of husk and things like that, right? And I think that was one part of it. That was, curiosity, inquisitiveness, building new products. But it was also the fact that, he would encourage and all of us to have meaningful debates in the house. There would be debates about whether, different types of medicine were good or bad, and he would take one side just to see each one of us, and we were four, come up with meaningful reasoning points and debates for each other. And that was another thing. But and he would also encourage us to be able to do little things around the house, and he would pay us for that. And the interesting thing is that, even though all of us were in exactly the same environment, I think I was the only one who really cared about making that little extra money to get my CDs and cassettes. At that point, I think getting music was more interesting than getting, anything else. So I think some of all that little pieces add up, and it helps you in sort of doing things. And I think you realize that over the years, and you start to discover who you are. And I think that's the whole process of evaluating, what you are good at, and what you are intrinsically good at, and what opportunities are being thrown at you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like an environment where there was a tremendous amount of curiosity and definitely a scientific temper as well. So that definitely sounds like a great way to grow up. I believe when you were small, you wrote a letter where you said you wanted to win a Nobel Prize in physics when you grow up. So how did that dream pan out for you?
So it was mostly, I think this was more, my dad would also do these recorded interviews. He was probably my first interviewer, and not just mine. He would do this for all of my siblings as well as cousins and all of that. And I think there were two things I mentioned in those interviews, and I wish I could get those tapes back. But one, I said that, I wanted to be in physics and wanted to win the Nobel Prize. And because my dad would ask me probing questions like, do you want to get into physics because your dad is in physics or otherwise? So in some ways, I guess he prepared me for also being able to speak up in some ways, right? And so these were some of the questions he asked. And I always wanted to, I was fascinated by a lot of the Nobel laureates and people like, Einstein, Feynman, and various other people. And I wanted to be, somebody who could make a meaningful difference in the lives. And at that point, my exposure was in physics, and that's what I wanted to do. So I think, it's always good to be able to aim high. It's where you reach is a percentage of what you think you will achieve. So I think it's always good to be able to aim high. And I look back at that, and I tell a lot of young kids and people that you need to aim high. It doesn't matter. Most people don't end up doing what they started out to be doing. But I think, that's the way we all start. And I think, as your exposure increases, as you start to know more about yourself, I think you can make those changes as you go along.
Yeah, I mean, as they say, aim for the moon and you at least land on top of the trees. So that definitely resonates. So you at least started on a very promising path to that career as a physicist. So you got a physics degree from IIT Kharagpur. What was it like being a woman in an IIT in the 90s?
So I think it was, in some ways, it was not too bad. It was, I remember that it was, we were always exposed to the fact that, if you get into IIT, there will be few women. So it was not something it really bothered me. And I think at least in IIT Kharagpur, I think most of your fellow classmates and others are reasonable people and logical people. So you don't have to really, be worried too much about things that a lot of times are talked about in some of the movies that you might be seeing. So it wasn't too bad, except that it would have been much better if we had a larger percentage of women. And I think that has changed. I went back to campus for our 25th year reunion and found that there were certainly a much larger number of women who were found. But it was, we were a small, at that point, the class size was about 400 for entire year. And the number of women would typically be around 10 to 20. and our batch was especially small. So I think it definitely you miss out on certain kinds of things, but at the same time there is enough activities to be able to do. And if you have people who are who you can work with and who are good at that, good at just being your colleagues and classmates, I think that adds to the fact that you don't feel out of place. But it would certainly be better if you had a much more diverse background.
Yeah. So what were some of your highlights during those 4 years?
So I think one, I definitely participated in a lot of different activities. The first year I remember went to Inter IIT, which is basically getting to play sports across all the IITs. At that point there were only 5. I think today there are many more, 18 or 20 or some 26 or something like that. And so being part of the whole Inter IIT and winning a lot of medals in that, I think was a highlight. The other was meeting my husband Sparsh. I think we were in the same class. We still we met in 1990 91, and today I think we've been together. So I think one was to be able to find the right person that you can work with and be married to is also. And the other important aspect that I believe I learned in college was that not only can you be you should not, probably it doesn't make sense for me to be a mediocre physicist, but to be able to pursue something that I think I could be much better at. And I think those were the also steps that I took in IIT that I learned over the years, that it was something that I dreamt of, but I think it was also something I evaluated, and I thought that it would be a good idea to be able to then change those priorities as I grow older, because I learned something about myself, which at that point, before that, I wasn't aware of. So talking to people, being able to be part of, being able to be involved in multiple different activities, being able to, just be the right connector to many different people. So I think you learn a few things, and I think for me that was the key learnings, I think, at that point.
Yeah, I mean, the meeting with your husband is definitely a bonus, but in general, it sounds like, yeah, I mean, the best college educations are the ones where you learn not what to think, but you learn how to think and how to navigate your life ahead. And so that sounds exactly how those years panned out for you as well. So you and Subhash both have a physics background. Then what prompts two physicists to become serial entrepreneurs in the biogenomics industry?
Sure. So I think it is very interesting, right? So Sparsh comes from a family that is involved in they're all medical doctors, but they all got into the business of in the business of chemicals and various other such in that space. So they sort of got into the whole business. They became a business family. But Subhash was very interested in research, right? So he came from a family that was primarily in business, and then he wanted to do research. In fact, he wanted to do research which was very theoretical physics at that point also. But and I came from a family that came from a research background, and I think over the years I started to feel that maybe the areas that I could do really well was in business. And so it was maybe in some form an interesting combination, because I think we ended up creating what we call as a business of research. So in some ways, the best of both worlds. So I think that's how of course this is in hindsight. At that point, I think we were going step by step. We didn't think that we would start a business. Bash wanted to go, and for some reason, I managed to convince him to move into doing an MBA. And then he did financial mathematics. But I went to the US to do a degree in a PhD in physics, actually, because I knew my parents couldn't afford otherwise. So I think that's how I went to the US, and then within a year got a master's, and then moved on to the business school. So that was our career progression. But I think in some ways maybe each one influenced the other, and what resulted was getting into the business of research in some form.
Yeah, and definitely, right? I mean, one of the things, so when I was reading about how you scaled your companies, that whole idea of research as a service is something that even your first company, Awesomum, was known for. And it definitely sounds like what they say, right? I mean, you read about this and hear about this in business school, but like complementarities in your founding team are just so important. And in your case, it defined the business that you're in. So yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So you're in the business of genomics. Now, in a country like India, most people have a Janam Patri, but not as many have a Genome Patri. So what does it take to scale and explain a business like that to customers? Like in a country where everyone is so used to going to the doctor when they're sick, how do you sort of turn that notion around to preventive medicine is important?
So I would say that when we started 7 years ago or so, at that point, I think one of our biggest challenges was just how do we introduce this concept, right? And it was not something people understood. They always thought that when you look at genetics, it was either for finding out if if your father is your real father. That was one part of the type of what kind of query, I mean, people were calling us for. The other thing that people thought of genetics was when you had a real disorder, right? So something like a thalassemia, cystic fibrosis, or something else, right? So these were things that some people were aware of, but most people were not aware of genomics as something that you could do to actually make a change in your own lifestyle, really. So I think the first step towards that was to be able to come up with a name that at least people will understand what we were trying to do. And so the first name, and I remember Sparsh and I continue to have both of us continue to not agree on the fact that Genome Patri was a good name, because we came from a very research heavy company, Awesomum, where mostly we were dealing with scientists, with people who understood the subject quite well. Whereas now we were dealing with consumers. And so I thought that the better way to be able to reach out to them was to be able to call it something that at least they are familiar with. And I think that's how I gave it the name Genome Patri. And I think being CEO helps, because you can veto everybody else and name. And I think that was what I started off with. And then I think the other things that we were able to do was to be able to, one, go slowly in terms of how do you educate the doctors community, because they will still be involved whether you sell directly to the consumer. I think in the end the consumer is going to ask someone who they respect, and I think that will always be the doctor in these cases where they're making a health decision. So I think one was to be able to make sure that we could start creating awareness about this product by reaching out to doctors, by being able to create educational videos about it, by writing about it. And I have I've been trying to make sure that any content that is coming out is not something that is difficult for people to understand, because otherwise I think it becomes a lost cause. You don't want it to be so difficult that it becomes hard for people to understand. So I think that is one part of it, creating awareness of the product. And the second is in the beginning to be able to get a few people who were we're going to be early adopters, getting them as part of the process. And then I think over the years, I think it has become now more accessible, because we've started working with a lot of hospitals. We started working with a lot of companies. We've also started working with online retailers like Amazon and Flipkart and others, that will allow us to be able to create that reach that is bigger. But in the last 1 year, we've also now have a presence in the airport in Hyderabad and others, that allows us to be able to reach out to consumers directly, but also through the medical community, because we worked with them on this front as well. So I think all these little pieces add up, and I think in the end, it takes a great product, understanding of who the key influencers are in this space, and to be able to go out there and not rush it too much in the beginning, because I think there were some companies that also did very fast and big marketing. But I think, sometimes you need to give people a little time to be able to digest. A lot of people will buy immediately. There will be some that take a while to be able to get to that point. So I think that's the process. And I think today come to a point where I think a lot more people know about, genomics is something that you can use for for a preventive health approach. And I think what we couldn't do in 6.5 years, I think the pandemic did. And I think that has, in many ways, educated the common consumer about health, and also about, terms like RNA, DNA, and what it means, right? What a mutation is. So I think all those are adding up, and at some point of time, I think now it's the point where it's up to us to be able to make sure that we can use it, and I think finally it'll be about also what the pricing and who's going to pay for it. And I think getting to a point where it becomes affordable for an average consumer, I think that's when all the pieces have fallen in place, and people start to get it.
Yeah, I mean, you said a bunch of very interesting things there. So the cost is going down, there's more access and ease of that. And early influencers was something that was very interesting. So, I mean, unintentionally, was Angelina Jolie a huge brand ambassador for preventive health when she did the double mastectomy? Like, did you see the ripple effects trickling into the consumer sentiment here as well? Or what did you mean when you said early influencers and those play a key role?
Yes, so she was definitely one of them, because it was very interesting that we had just started the company, and it seemed like Time Magazine, and also everybody at that point, New York Times, everybody was kind of in that process of helping us get to this promised land in some form. And so in a lot of my presentations, because we had just started, I think 6 months before that, and all of this came out, I would often use this as material because it was something people could relate to. And so, yes, people like her are unpaid influencers for us. But there have also been other people who have been early adopters and have been very, very helpful for us. Some of them are, have allowed us to use their names. Others have not. But I think they've been able to tell it in their own little spheres. And, we've been able to get some very good people who have vouched for our products early on. And I think that sort of has helped us in establishing that trust with the consumers. And I think that continues to be as we grow along with this path.
Absolutely. And so how do I think of your typical customer? Is it people who have a genetic history or predisposition to cancer? Is it expecting mothers? Like how would you define the archetypical Map My Genome customer?
So I think let's first start with a Genome Patri customer, right? Because now we have expanded our range to have, products that are involved in both the clinical aspects as well as, RT-PCR and a few, blood markers and various other things. So if you take just the Genome Patri product, which is probably still our main product that we have, I think there, while it can, it's something that anyone can buy because it is for understanding your own DNA and for understanding how you can lead a more healthier life. What we found is that initially there were people who were doing this out of curiosity. Then it became families who wanted to make changes in their lifestyle for the entire family. And so we've often found that there were large, complete families that were buying this, sometimes as large as 20, 30 people at once. There are also people who got this because they've had some family history of either diabetes or cardiovascular or cancers or otherwise. And we've also found that people have bought it for reasons like fitness and nutrition that we've seen, because a lot of elite athletes use our product for being able to help to tailor their nutrition and fitness levels. And, about 2 years ago, we also launched the Ancestry product, which is more trying to understand what your, where your ancestors came from and how much of, do you have genes from UP, from Rajasthan, from Maharashtra, and subsections of that as well. So I think that appeals to a large set of people. So, it depends on the product, and the Genome Patri product, for instance, is covers a broad range of conditions and traits, and drugs that will will work for you. But these specific products that we have, whether it is OncoMap for cancer or CardioMap for cardiovascular, we have products like that. Those you typically find people who specifically are looking for solutions in those areas. But Genome Patri is for somebody who's looking at preventive health in general, and they are able to then use this product to be able to then use the counseling piece and the recommendations that we give them to be able to make changes in their lifestyle, as well as find out what kind of tests are appropriate for them and so on. So I think that would be your typical Genome Patri customer. Typically, they are in the age group of the people who are buying it are typically over in the normally. I'm not saying that it's restricted, but if you take the average customer, that is typically between the age of 30 and 60 on the like the large majority of them.
Yeah, I mean that's a wide range.
It's a wide range, and it initially started off in being in the big cities, but now we pretty much have customers from almost every state in India, and every tier 2, tier 3 city as well. So it is not no longer restricted. In fact, one of the things we enjoy doing is to see which cities have we touched and where do we not have enough representation, because I think the more samples we have, which are more diverse, I think that helps us in understanding a lot better in terms of what the how we can improve the product in the future as well. So the good thing is that once you get the profiling done, then you can continue to get more and more data for that.
Yeah, and I mean, so which cities are your loyalist cities, and which ones do you need to penetrate more? Any interesting patterns there?
So the large cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, and all definitely have been very high. But we've also seen a large number coming in from like Pune, from Indore, from Lucknow, from some cities in even in Assam. We've had people from different parts. So it's a little hard now to say where we are getting too many many numbers, but it certainly is the larger cities. Obviously, we see many more because I guess it's also a larger population. But we are even seeing from some smaller cities in Telangana, in Andhra Pradesh, and others. That I think the south we see a lot of the smaller cities quite often, maybe because we are present in Hyderabad. But there are some parts I think that we can do more. I guess some parts in Rajasthan, where I come from, we don't see as many as I would expect them to be.
Got it. And given that now, I mean, the adoption is pretty spread out across big cities, not so big cities. You're selling it directly, like you said, B2C on Amazon, Flipkart. How easy is it to use? Can someone just literally get a Genome Patri product on Amazon, open it, and know what to do?
Absolutely. So you can just go to Amazon, you order it, and I have a little kit if you want to see what happens. So
Nice.
When people place an order, they just within a day they should get a box that looks like this. I don't know if you can see that here.
Yeah.
So I have opened this up so that you can at least see what is there. So inside this box, you can see there are instructions on how to use it. And there is a consent form over here. So it will basically give you, this is information that we get for your family history, your health history, and all of that. But that is not needed to do the first report. And then there is inside this is a little thing, and this is almost like using a toothbrush, right? So
Yeah.
you can basically open it up, and like you do a little brush, like you brush your teeth, you basically take it out and you brush your cheeks instead of your teeth. So it's as simple as the same sort of thing that you're used to doing on a daily basis every day. You just have to make sure it doesn't touch your teeth with touching your cheeks and swirling it around on both sides. for about at least 10-15 times on each side, and then you turn it around, you put it back in and close it, and then we'll get it picked up from you. So you don't have to leave your desk. You can work from home and it'll come to you, and we'll make sure it is picked up. And I think that's the process that is required to be able to just do the test. And after that, it is all online, right? So you will get information on a regular basis that, this is what is happening. Your DNA is being extracted. Your quality looks good. And then, after a couple of days, then you'll get, not couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, you get a report. And in the report, you get like 100-page report, which is substantial. But the first few pages are, they're all nice and colorful and easy to read. So you can see all the, the report format. But the same time that we send the report, we also ask you to schedule a time with the genetic counselor, because that's the most important part, because you want to make sure that, the genetic counselor can correlate your family history, your health history, and your genetic information. Because in the end, it's like your genes load the gun, but your environment plays the trigger, right? So pulls the trigger. So you are trying to make sure that whatever you're doing from a lifestyle perspective is not something that is going to be, against what your, genes are sort of indicating, right? So in many ways, if you did everything right, then maybe, even if you had bad genes, it was fine. But if you did the wrong things, then the genes can tilt you over the wrong direction. So I think that's what we say, that, for instance, like I have the sprint genes. That doesn't mean I'll become an Olympic champion. But if I was training, and I did all the right things that a champion does, and then I had the genes, it gives me that edge. Right? Yeah. The same thing is there when you have let's say you are, you have diabetes, or, you have a risk of diabetes, and you're doing all the wrong things, then it'll push you over the edge much faster. If you don't have the genetic variants, then the chances are that it'll take a few more years for you to be able to get to that. So I think those are the kind of things that we help people understand. And it's not just things like diabetes. We found, we've been able to find out in some cases, people who never had a family history of, certain diseases that we've been able to find out. And that did come, the early signs started coming after 5 years. So I think that's the value of being able to get this information, because if you never did it, then you would probably not even think that was what it was. So I think that is the value of getting that knowledge. And the other is, of course, to be able to make those changes in your lifestyle that will allow you to be able to negate that, the effects of the condition in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, forearmed is forewarned, right? I mean, it's always good to know if something is in your genetics that predisposes you. Of course, then you have to step up and make sure that you're living in a way and acting in a way that you're not shooting yourself in the foot. But I mean, both together, like you said, is a great combination to just be most effective in taking charge of your health. So convincing customers is clearly an intricate, nuanced, mammoth task in and of itself. What about investors? How challenging was it to convince investors in the early days when you started out?
So I think this is my second company. So I would say that the first, and we haven't raised a lot of capital. I mean, we have raised less. We are now profitable, and probably the only genomics company that is profitable. So it did not take us too long to raise the first round, but it does take an effort to be able to get in some of the other, if you had to raise a large amount of money, I think it would still take a lot of effort to be able to do that. But when we had to do the first round, I think we had people who reached out to us, and that's when we thought we should at least get one round in place, and we did. And I think our aim at that point was to be able to get the right people that can help grow the business. So I think the important thing for me was, can we get the right board in place? Second is, if we get investors, can we get the right investors who will help us make those connections? Because this is still an early, like an age, for genomics that is still early, and having investors that can help us get the right connections, whether it's hospitals, whether it's something else, can be very, very helpful. So I think that's one of the things that we were trying to do, and made sure that when we were raising that round, we got really good investors on board. We have people like Rajan Anandan, who I was on a panel with, and that's how I got introduced to him. We have Mr. the Patnis, and they have a hospital. We have the Singapore Angel Network, and they introduced me to a whole, many different companies and other areas. And then, of course, I think the next year we got a key investor in Mr. Tata. And that, I think, was a fascinating experience, of course. And that was also because we again, I think it was, for me, that moment was very interesting, because he had actually read every single thing we had written on our pitch deck. And I think that moment was worthwhile, waiting for him to be able to have that conversation with him, and to know that what we do is an important aspect of what the society and the country needs. So I think getting people like that on your as investors, I think makes all the difference, and maybe in some ways inspires you to do better. So I think that's what we did. We haven't raised too much capital after that in MapMyGenome, but I have certainly raised capital in the other company, Ossimum, where we raised more than $20 million.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, something you're saying is also it pops out at me, right? Like, especially in the early stages, entrepreneurs think that investors choose them, but it's almost like the entrepreneur has to also be very, very conscious of who they're choosing as investors, right? To have the right know-how and networks to scale the company. So it's not the way a lot of founders think that, oh, let an investor choose me.
I think it's a very important part. I think you have to make sure that the investors you choose, because it's not something you're doing for a day, right? You're going to be having these investors on your cap table for a long time, and it's very, very important to be able to get the right investors who understand your vision, who understand what you can, how this contributes, and how long it's going to take for this process of getting to them liquidity. So I think people shouldn't just take money because it's available, but to be able to do that if they find the right investors.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And so, I mean, as a woman, when you're raising funding, have you run into genetic biases, like people who are more like them, or were the challenges not more significant being a female founder?
So I think one thing, and I tell this to a lot of people, I think I didn't see any obvious things that many others have faced, right? But I think what happens is, when you are in I think there are two problems that we have to figure out. That one, is it because of the gender bias, or two, whether it is because of they're not understanding this business bias, right? And so I think those are two things. But it is for sure that people like more people like themselves, and I think that will change only if we have more women who become investors. Because in the end, I think, and I think I might have told you this about, MapMyGenome, and how we had, a lot of we had too many women, and we ended up hiring more and more women. So I think that is a tendency that people tend to have. So I think it's important to be able to, have that diversity in people who are investing, because I think that's when it improves the diversity of what happens in terms of where the funding grows. I think that's true also of how you look at the boards, for instance, right? So if you look at our board, we have 50% male and 50% female, and we are also striving to do that in the company as well. So I think that's the sort of thing that we want to make sure that it's not it's not lopsided one way or the other, because we've seen what happens when it's when it's too heavy in too heavy women or too heavy men. So I think that's one thing that we need to do. But I agree. I think we need to have more diversity amongst the investor community. But personally, I think, and luckily for me, I think I haven't faced any obvious biases just because I'm a woman. I think in our case, it was also that it's an area that is a little bit harder for people to understand than normal. And I think now it is becoming easier. So I think now I can tell you, if I go now and raise capital, if I have that problem, I think maybe then I'll be able to find out if that is the problem. But I remember we used to have meetings where we would start and we would go through this process, explain to one person, and then the next person would come in and you have to start all over. What is DNA? What is RNA? And all of that. So I think, that was probably a bigger challenge in the space of genomics before the pandemic. And now I think it is probably going to be easier.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, and you can't just isolate variables and know if it's because of the business model or gender. That just makes a lot of sense. And even that whole point about diversity, right? It's true in any product team. You're serving diverse customers. You want a diverse product team. You want diverse investors. You want diverse employees. That really resonates. So talking of your team, so something I found fascinating when I spoke with members of your team is that most of your core leadership team just stays with you forever. They never leave. What's the secret sauce there?
I think if they're not fit for the company, they probably leave early, right? It's not something that they will continue to be there if they don't fit into our style. So I'd say that some people who don't fit in, they don't stay very long, right? And I think we make sure that we tell that to people who are probably looking for something else in terms of what they are building. But I think important thing is to be able to build that culture around the team. And I think in the end, if you have the right people that you've hired, and they also resonate with the same vision that you have, I think that builds the rest of the team very easily. So I think that's sort of maybe what we've been able to do. But I think, for most people, I think is to be able to connect with them in some level or the other, whether it is in a space that is outside of direct work, or whether it is in something else. I think finding out something about them, or being able to do something together with them is what makes us be part of this whole process together. And I think that's how the core team was created. And they are people who believe in the same values. And I think once you get that team, I think then you have the rest of the team easily built up over there.
Yeah. I mean, I think from what your team members tell me, I think it's the different kinds of teas that you concoct for them and the group fitness classes that you do together. I think that plays a huge role as well.
Yeah. Those are all the fun things we do. I think for all the people who don't know, I will make all kinds of teas and bother the team. And we had our own little team group that would say, okay, I made this tea today. You can come and come join us and have this tea. And I think now they're at a point where, if it is bad, they'll tell me to my face that it's not, and the other thing is, of course, I think it's very important to be able to, let your head down with everyone, and you are, and not be, I'm not like somebody who won't be part of the activities that are going on. I'm very much involved in in the activities that happen. So even though I might not have done all the work in planning, I'm certainly very much there when it comes to actual, anything that is going on, whether it's a birthday party, whether it's anything else. So I think when you are part of the team, I think, you start to enjoy that whole companionship of the team as well. And I think doing that is what makes everybody, know each other in a level that, doesn't create those layers. And I think when you create layers in a company that has a mission to be able to, has a purpose to be doing things that are not so commoditized. I think it's a very important aspect to what I believe is important in building a company.
No, absolutely. And everyone in your team echoes that. So the open door policy, the belief in the same vision, that's just all things you hear from everyone. And it's just exciting to see such a strong, close knit core team. I mean, there are people on your team who say they feel like it's a family, and that's amazing. That even when a company scales, employees feel that way. Something we all also talk about is that you're this person who has a steel will, but you have a very soft spoken demeanor and leadership style. How do you think that has shaped the organizational culture?
Yeah, so luckily I don't have a very loud voice, and I think because of my DNA or whatever, I don't get angry very quickly. Um, so I think that helps because it is I'm generally a happy person. So I think one is to be able to utilize that, and I think it's because I think happiness is contagious. So I think it passes on to the rest of the team as well. So I think that's one part that came naturally through my genes, I guess, from my dad or mom. But the other thing is that I believe that everybody is capable and that they need to be, I think, be motivated and given credit for what they are capable of. And many times they can do something better than you can do, even though sometimes it might just feel that you are in a hurry and you need to get somewhere. So I think, the way I work at least is when there's a new project and there's something new to be done and people don't believe it, I'm very, very involved in it. And I will be there for looking at every little pieces of it. In fact, many times people will not believe that will work. And I know that this, in my gut, that this is going to work. I will put in all the effort. And then once it starts to work, I very quickly back off. And I think that's the sort of thing I get, I don't micromanage on on every project that is there. So I would probably be micromanaging in the very early stages of a project, and after that back off, especially when people don't believe. I think because it's important to show that I care, I will be able to do something. And I think I'm also not worried about saying I made a mistake. So I think those aspects help in building that confidence in the team, and they can also make mistakes as long as they tell that they are okay, they've made a mistake, I think, and they've acknowledged the fact. I think it is a perfectly fine thing. When you don't acknowledge a mistake, you don't have the courage to own up, then it becomes a big challenge, I feel, in organizations. So I think that's the sort of thing that, if you're able to bring that out as being the leader, I think it sort of creates that example for the rest of them as well. So I think that's probably what I believe is easier for people to connect on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Creating that safe space where it's okay to fail sometimes and learn from it, that is just so, so important. So you're clearly a huge inspiration to everyone at Map My Genome. Who inspires you?
So I have a lot of people who have inspired me. I think maybe growing up, my dad and my brother were probably two big, people that I looked up upon. And my dad, for obvious reasons, I think I explained. I had, my brother who would be, who was extraordinarily intelligent, but he would be able to very quickly explain an answer and go away. My dad, if I asked him a question, he would go through the details of it and start to understand. And I think in some strange way, I think the way I process information is that I also try to, go to the, root of it. But sometimes I also do it, very quickly, whether it's reading a book or otherwise. So I think one is that they have influenced me in just being who I am. But there are other people who have, other than people that I don't know and who have influenced me through their books or just being there in the world. Great leaders. I think the people who have actually truly been mentors for me are people like Dr. Anula and Arjun and others. Some of them I'm very lucky to have on my board now, because I found that they could bring in certain things that I, before they became my board members, I think I still looked up to them for critique, for advice, and others. There are people also like other leaders who have created, whether it is people like Steve Jobs, very cliched, but true. I do admire a lot of things that he has done, like, minus a lot of things that he also did. So I think there are people that I truly admire. There are people that so I look at different people. I don't think one is right or wrong, but what I have become is to be able to maybe take some of the pieces that I think has influenced and I goes through my filter in some form, right? And I think everybody does that. You sort of imbibe a little bit of everybody that has been part of your life in some form.
Totally. That's almost like your personal board, right? Like you have a company board and then you have people who influence and shape the way you live your life. So let's switch gears a little bit from your incredible accomplishments as a businesswoman, as a scientist, and let's talk about your poetry. So you're a published poet, and in your words, you write about science, non-science, and nonsense. So there's one rhyme I must ask you about. Eat Nutella and don't mope about it. What is the genesis of that rhyme?
So I think it is that, of course, I tell people that, one shouldn't, it's not a good idea to eat a lot of sugar, but, but at the same time, I think sometimes you want to eat it, right? And when I do, I don't feel guilty about it. So I think it is about when you are enjoying something, I think you have to be in that moment, enjoy that completely and not think about it after that, right? What you do beyond that would be things that would, that will make sure that those effects are sort of taken off, so you don't have to have the guilt feeling about it. Same thing, when I look at life and you look at, there are many things that people feel guilty about. They're not there for X, they're not there for Y, and they're not able to spend time with this, they're not able to do this, they're not able to do that. I think in the end, I enjoy what I'm doing and I don't have guilt about what I'm not doing or what I'm doing. And I think that sort of shows in both in terms of how I do my parenting, how I, just with people around me, because, if you feel like eating something, I think just eat it and don't feel guilty about it. Just don't keep on doing it. But, I think it's about just, having that, guilt-free, be in the moment sort of a person. And I'm that. So
I love it. I love it. A no regrets policy to life. I'm guessing poetry has also helped you simplify science for your customers. I mean, it's an easy way to convey these very complex concepts that we are talking about, right?
Yes, and I did it more for myself in the beginning. I have to say that, this was something I would do. So when I start to understand a subject, I would say that, how do I make it simpler for people to understand? And so I started writing this out for myself, and I used to just put it on my blog out there. And so many years ago, I think I remember that, the manufacturer of one of these instruments reached out to me and said, we've never had anybody write poetry about an electron microscope. So I said, well, it is just who I am. And they actually published it on their website, for instance. So I think that's the sort of thing that, you do certain things for yourself, or you do it for, for some, for a particular audience, but you never know who will find it interesting. A lot of the poetry that I wrote is just, some discussion I've had with somebody else. In the beginning, a lot of the nonsense poetry was all things that I'd written to my, with my friends on Facebook, and then I picked up pieces of that and put it down on a Word. So I have the second volume that I still haven't published. So I haven't found those 2-3 days to be able to do that. But I have enough material for that already. So hopefully I'll get the version 2 published as well, the second volume.
Yeah, no, that will be exciting. I mean, looking forward to it. So you've spoken a lot about the grounding sort of force that, having your co-founder also being your husband and your co-parent has been. Another very interesting thing that people who know the both of you say is that you are this big picture extroverted person, and Subhash is more reticent and very detail oriented and in the weeds. So, has the way your roles and responsibilities have evolved, is that just an extension of your personalities? Is that intentional, or how did it happen?
So I think in some ways it was intentional and some ways it was discovery. So when we first started, so we both started the first company in the year 2000. And at that point, I remember that, there was, we had a little baby who's now all grown up. But we would take turns in going to meetings, especially outside of India, because most of our market was not in India at that point of time. And we would check what each one of us would go. We would do all these things, whether it was sales calls, whether it was operations or otherwise. And I think over a period of time, some of it was obvious just based on our personalities, but some of it was also that we found out who was better at doing certain things than the others. And so that's how we discovered, and we realized that I was better at doing things that required you to think a few years ahead, trying to get a team together, getting the right spirits together, in some ways literally, and also I think in many ways to be able to be the face of the company. Subhash, on the other hand, really enjoys the nitty gritties, and he can be doing this many times, doing that over and over again, which for me becomes a little too tedious. So I think it depends on you have to find the right co-founder who complements what you're doing, because both of those are needed. And therefore I think it was, I guess, in some ways both what we knew and what we didn't know at the beginning when we started, and how we evolved. So in Map My Genome, actually, Subhash wasn't very involved till recently, and now he's getting more involved. So I think I did want him to come back. I think it was both ways. He initially founded the company. I was still the CEO of Ossimum, and then he asked me to come in and be the CEO, and I said I will, but you have to go back to Ossimum, and you can't be in Map My Genome for a few years. I think that was the decision. We made them two completely separate companies with separate boards, separate everything. And then I think it's only recently that we got him back as somebody who was fully involved in the company. And I think that is very important, very necessary, especially as we were expanding into multiple business areas like COVID testing, like sequencing, and many other things on the clinical side. And you needed somebody who could have that hold on coming up with new labs, making sure someone's watching what is happening, being very clear about what is, whether that's a straight line or not. Those kind of things, I think a little bit not something that I enjoy doing too much. So I think that's and he's always been detail oriented. And unfortunately, some things that I might have told him 20 years ago, he'll still have them written in little post-it notes. I think that's the difference in just who each one of us, what each one of us brings to the table. So I guess that's the part. We also had a co-founder in the first company who brought in the scientific expertise in Ossimum, Dr. Sujata. And I think that was very important at that point of time, because clearly both of us came from a physics background, even though Subhash had moved more into finance. So I think, getting people who are different but who can work together, I think is what makes a company, that founding team successful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, right through this conversation, if one thing is really popping out at me, is those complementarities are so important. Do these different leadership styles also extend to your parenting styles?
Oh, definitely. I think I'm the nice one. No, I think I do that with both my children as well as the pups that we have. Whenever we used to have this pup called Daisy, and she passed away. Now we have these two little beagles. But Swash does all the work. He's taking care of them. He'll take them out in the morning. He's doing them. He'll give them bath and everything. But I have all the treats. So I think I get all the love. So I think that sometimes is there, with the kids. But I think with the kids, I think we've had a little bit of a role reversal in with one. I think I don't know. It's their perception, but one of our children thinks that Subhash is very tough, and the other thinks that I am very tough. So I guess it depends. But I think, with the puppies, I think for me, the easier thing is to bribe them. So I always had cheese.
Nice. With your daughters, little bit of good cop, bad cop across the two varies. But with the puppies, it's always you're the nice one.
Always.
Nice. So as we wrap up, I guess, so like you said, you have two daughters who are now both pretty grown up. One just graduated college, one is finishing school. Looking back at your own personal journey, what advice would you give them?
I think they are the ones advising me nowadays. But I think they've what I would like for them to do is that they do what they like doing, and I think that was the same thing that my dad let me do. So one is to be able to give them that independence to be able to make those decisions on their own, and second is to be able to not just choose and do something just because somebody else is doing, but it's because you feel passionately about, and it's perfectly fine to be able to change your mind at some point of time, and not feel bad about it as well. So I think I would say that those are the only things that I have for them, that they need to be independent, and they should also be financially independent, just in case so that they can stand up on their own and they can do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that, right? And it again deeply resonates with what my parents have always said: love unconditionally, support unconditionally, but carve your own path. Love it. I think that's just a great note to wrap up the conversation. Well, thank you, Anu. This has been great. I've had a wonderful time, and I'm sure our viewers have enjoyed this very fun and candid conversation as much as I have.
Okay, thank you so much. It's always fun chatting with you, and hopefully we will meet each other once Corona goes into hiding.
Yes, hopefully we have this conversation in person as opposed to on a computer screen soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.